So let's start out with the self and only the self. We are made in the image of the divine. We've heard this before, and we were taught we are made in the image of God. From that, we inferred that God must have human qualities. It was never taught explicitly, but it was inferred, just like us, so he must look human too. We were taught that he is mal and that he is love, but also just, and that he gets upset, he exacts vengeance, and he craves praise and thanksgiving. Basically, without explicitly being told this, we were taught that he has an ego the size of Texas. What we weren't taught is that much of what we were taught is incorrect. So from a young age, we were fed information that is the exact opposite of what the divine is, except for that love part. The divine is spirit, love, and truth. Period. That's it. No matter what that other book says. We are a reflection of the divine, which again is spirit. We, that which is we, or to singularize it, that which is I, is not the physical body that the majority of the population of the planet believes themselves to be. We are spirit, love, and truth, the same as the Creator that created us. There is only the self, the real self, also known as the absolute or the divine, to drop a few names. When we think we see separate people or things out there in the world, when we have thoughts in the mind, when we have feelings in the body, we are imagining it all. Great works of literature have been written in an attempt to teach us this, and I'm not talking about religious or spiritual books whatsoever. But our ignorance is such that it's preventing us from seeing correctly and from thinking correctly. When the ignorance is removed, truth is all that remains. In other words, the real self is all that remains. It is revealed. Yeah, but what about the fact that we have bodies with 5 senses and we supposedly have brains that think and are logical? What about the fact that I have my own body and you all have your own bodies? What about the fact that it's me who's speaking right now and you who are listening? Is that not proof that we are separate individuals and real? What about the fact that I think my thoughts and you think your thoughts? That I go to a holistic practitioner and you may go to a Western medical doctor? Are we not separate and individual? Now that is real, you may say. Well, whether we follow the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta, Buddhism, or A Course in Miracles, one of the things we learn early on is to not argue the points just presented, because the fact that we seem to be here cannot be refuted. Instead, we address these questions and adamant statements with long, roundabout explanations, and perhaps long-winded. Such as, there is appearance and there is reality. When a child is told about Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, there is not only total fascination, but there is awe and belief regarding these two never-before-seen faces. The children believe in both of them, the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus, with all their hearts, their minds, their souls, their bodies. As adults, we know better. The same is true when a child sees a magician for the first time. All of it is believable. All of it is real. After all, our senses can't be lying to us. What is witnessed by the child actually happened in their minds. But if an adult sees the magician, he or she knows that it's magic, it's sleight of hand, it's not true, and even if the adult doesn't know how the magic act works, he knows that it is not real. It is an illusion. Well, the same can be said about this seeming reality. The wise amongst us, the enlightened, or the self-realized, still see the same objects and people that the rest of us see. The difference is that the self-realized knows that what is seen is an illusion. To the self-realized person, there is no longer objective knowledge of any kind as far as reality is concerned. It goes beyond that. There is only the unassailable truth. So what can we do to convey these concepts that I'm always talking about? We can use analogies, metaphors, and amusing anecdotes to tell stories that communicate these concepts, because no logical explanation will suffice, as the mind is not ready for most people to comprehend the real self. So here's another story, and one that we have all heard before, and we'll probably hear it again in our lifetimes a few times. It's about the rope and the snake. We walk into a darkened room at night to an unfamiliar place, and we see on the floor a snake ready to strike. Very carefully and quickly, we hightail it out of there. We come back when it's light outside with others and with an appropriate tool to capture the snake. Of course, we walk in and see that the snake turns out to be a coiled up piece of rope. It's obvious what happened. We saw the shape of the rope, and because it was dark and in an unfamiliar place, and we have snakeophobia, we mistakenly thought it to be a snake. In the light of day, we can see that what it is what it always was. We can see in the light that what it is what it always was. In the same way, because of our ignorance, aka the darkness, we see what appears to be a world of separate and individual objects, places, and people. That is, we see the snakes. When we bring light to the subject, we realize that we were mistaken in projecting onto that which is really there, the real self. This mistaking of the apparent as something other than the real self is called adhyasa in Sanskrit. Adhyasa. It literally means superimposing some false appearance onto actual reality. We are the real stuff. We are the real self. So how did this gigantic error come about? And what can we do to correct it? Well, as they say, there's good news and there's bad news. Let's look at the second question first. What can we do to correct the error? The bad news is there's nothing we can do about it. The good news is there's nothing we need to do. Now, another way of saying this is the bad news is there's no key to unlock the door to truth and reality. The good news is the door was never locked. Just walk through. As the actor Peter O'Toole said, "When did I realize I was God? I was praying and suddenly realized I was talking to myself." The realization, the epiphany, is that we are the real self or higher self already. Nothing we do can change this. So how is it that we don't know this? How is it we think otherwise, or that our experience is anything but? Even after one of the greatest philosophers and one of the greatest playwrights of all time have written extensively about this very subject. This is in addition to the fact that some religions and philosophies on this planet started out teaching this greater truth about ourselves. We started out a long time ago with the knowledge that we are all one, and it was described as all existence, all awareness, all bliss. It was called in Sanskrit eons ago Satchidananda. Satchidananda. Sat means existence, reality, truth. Chit means consciousness. Ananda means bliss. One day, long ago, someone or many someones decided that they wanted Satchidananda or eternal bliss all for themselves, no longer willing to share this euphoric state. Selfishness developed. This can be compared to what the Bible refers to as original sin, the beginning of our slide to our current state of unbounded ignorance. And to understand the level of ignorance to which we are accustomed, let me tell you another story. Again, one in which we are all familiar, a classic scene described by that teacher and philosopher Plato in the Republic. Now, we may all remember the story, but probably not quite like this version. Plato writes of a cave slightly underground where slaves are tied in such a way that they cannot move their heads and thus can see only the far wall of the cave relative to the entrance. So the entrance is behind them. They cannot see the entrance, the flames casting shadows from the fire, the other prisoners, or even themselves. All that can be seen by the slaves are the shadows of the people and objects passing by the entrance, and only the upper part of the people and objects at that. The prisoners are only able to see shadows, not the cause of the shadows, the actual people and objects. This is their total experience. They believe that the shadows are what is real, and they cannot comprehend that there might be something else, something real behind these shadows. When anyone walking by the entrance to the cave is speaking, the prisoners believe it is the shadow speaking. If the person walking by is carrying an object, the prisoner is unable to discern which of the shadows is the speaker and which is the object, so he assumes they're both intelligent, both capable of speaking. The bored and frustrated prisoners have devised a game to play amongst themselves to predict which shapes will appear next on the wall, based on their accurate observation of current shapes and movement, and their memory of earlier patterns. Their skill set determines their hierarchy amongst themselves. He who is most successful at predicting the next shape is chosen as leader amongst the prisoners. Plato's story represents our lives as we experience it in the present. Kind of sounds like politics, doesn't it? In Sanskrit, it is called Vyava Arika. Vyava Arika, the apparent state of existence as a state of total delusion. This one, when I learned of this, made me burst out laughing. They even have a name for it in Sanskrit, and why not? Because they studied everything. But Plato's story continues as he asks us to imagine the feelings of one of the slaves if he were suddenly released, forced to turn around and look towards the entrance. After having faced one direction for his entire life, movement of any kind would be very painful, even if it was upward movement. Are you getting this? Never having been exposed to direct light, now looking directly at the flames or the light of day would be extremely difficult, resulting in limited sight. When told that the objects moving before his very eyes were actual reality and the shadows he had thought were real were an illusion, he would have great difficulty understanding or accepting any of it, and further would think that his informer had gone mad. When forced to exit the tunnel and enter the street, he'd not be able to see anything due to its brightness, nor make any sense of it if he were able to see fully. Which, by the way, is why we must approach enlightenment very, very slowly. Our ego couldn't handle it. After a while, after having acclimated to this new environment and seeing how people and objects make the shadows, not the other way around as he thought his entire life, he comes to some understanding of the sun itself, the source of all this phenomena. And so after a time, the released man has a fuller understanding of reality. Eventually, he desires to return to his former prison to rescue his friends and tell them the truth of what he has discovered. But upon returning, he finds that he cannot see very well in the darkness, being almost totally blind by the lack of light. Nor can he play the game he used to play with any degree of accuracy or skill, thus performing worse than the worst of them. So now he is regarded warily and considered unworthy by the other prisoners, the lowest of the low. Anything he might have to teach them would be regarded as having less relevance than that of a raving madman. They would rather murder him than let him rescue them and be affected the way he obviously has been, the nutjob that he is. He may be enlightened, but they would rather remain in the dark than be like he is. Shadows are an effect, not a cause, What a crazy person he is. This is the situation we find ourselves in right now, today, worldwide. We have no reason to doubt what we see around us or hear what we hear, except that at a very deep level, when we do take a moment to pause and reflect, when we go inside and we realize that much of what happens in this world, it just seems to be just plain old stupid. Yet, do we take the risk of walking out of the tunnel into the open where the blinding light of truth is? No, most of us do not want to take that risk. A few of us foolish ones, however, do take the risk. We have shifted our perception just enough because there is something within the mind. This something is the decision maker. Buddhi, the only aspect within our dream in which choice can be found. We eventually realize that it is not the world that needs to change, it is us individually. It's not our outer perceptions that need to change, but rather our inner perceptions of ourselves. Are we children of God or of the ego? Is our reality the changeless oneness of spirit or the ever-changing individuality of separation? Is our teacher spirit or ego? In other words, this other way of looking at the world begins in our minds with the choice of which eyes we choose to see, the eyes of vision or the eyes of judgment. Perhaps we need more information to convince us. So listen to one of the greatest playwrights of all time, Shakespeare, from The Tempest. In it, he is very direct, very explicit, and pointedly highlighting that life as we know it, that we think is real, is but an illusion. Our revels now are ended. These, our actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits, and were melted into thin air. Into thin air, and like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, all which it inherit, shall dissolve, and like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. So yes, one of his more famous lines, we are such stuff as dreams are made of. In other words, we are dreaming, period. He could not get more detailed and explicit. And our little life is rounded with a sleep, meaning we are asleep and dreaming this dream while sleeping. We are dreaming while awake, which is what we think we are right now, and dreaming while we are asleep, which is what we do when we go to bed at night. Can it be any more plain, any more simple, any more explicit? I think not. Stay tuned, as I will be providing more as we go along on this philosophical path of Advaita Vedanta, mixed with teachings from A Course in Miracles. I could go back and forth between these two philosophies that are over 2,000 years apart in age, and because of the similarities between the two, you would not know from which came what. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy this day. I don't know if it's going to remain sunny, but it matters not, because your happiness lies within. Have a great day.